So last night, Justin Trudeau was on Stephen Colbert. You may have noticed he's been on a bit of a pop culture tour lately. He's turned up in a lot of places. I want to know, what does he get out of this? Today on the show, the Prime Minister's relationship with pop culture. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. Justin Trudeau was on The Late Show last night. And look, the Prime Minister is in New York for the UN's General Assembly. So, of course, it made sense to just squeeze a bit of time on Stephen Colbert's couch.
You guys are paying too much for your lumber because you've got tariffs on it, and that doesn't make any sense. So we keep trying to point that out for you. Right. But we'll keep working on that.
But we come up to you guys to get cheaper drugs.
Yeah,
we come over the border for cheaper drugs. You guys okay with that?
We're happy to try and help you out, but it'd be really easier if you guys had universal health care.
I would say it's been a minute since we've heard applause like that for the Prime Minister. Now, this is just the latest and probably most high profile in a long string of appearances that Trudeau has done lately. It's been podcasts and talk shows, but also he showed up at the new docuseries premiere for The Tragically Hip at the Toronto International Film Festival. All of this is supposed to move the dial on his popularity and sort of up his pop culture currency. But let's just say we've come maybe a long way from the days when Justin Trudeau was on the cover of magazines and swooned over by talk show hosts. Justin Ling is here. Amil Niazi is here. Welcome to the show, you guys. How's it going?
Good.
Hey, Peachy.
Hello. Listen, this is a pop culture show, okay? We leave the politics for the other guys. They're more than qualified to do so. But on the show, the thing that I'm most interested in, and I'm most interested to understand, is like the way that the Prime Minister uses pop culture as a tool, because that's the business of this show. So with that in mind, Justin Ling, you fired up Colbert to watch the Prime Minister there. How was it?
It was sort of two different interviews. The first half was like I was sitting on my sofa cringing so hard I thought I was going to pull a muscle. Like it was really difficult to get through.
Okay.
And then in the second half, the Prime Minister basically turns to doing like a campaign ad, and he's clearly more rehearsed on that, more prepared for that. He gets teed up to talk about being a teacher and liking Star Wars, which is like his whole personality. And so it was much more comfortable towards the back end. But, the whole thing was kind of tough because it's very clear that the Prime Minister wants to go back to that time when he was kind of a political meme. And the trouble with memes is that they have a very short shelf life. Mm-hmm. And trying to revive a meme from 10 years ago is just inviting a really kind of awkward fake nostalgia. And this just reeks of that. I can see why they did it. But I just think the majority of people who watched it are going to come away with this sort of just, it feels like Mr. Burns in the high school. Like, how do you do, fellow kids? Like, it just definitely feels over the top and trying to make us pine for 2015.
The idea that he's trying to turn himself specifically back into that meme is interesting. I want to stay with that for a moment because obviously, memes are also how you quantify the reaction to an interview like this. Mm-hmm. Justin, when you look at the reaction, I don't imagine it's what the Liberals were hoping for, just in terms of Trudeau being received as a meme or sort of the whole interview being distilled as a meme.
Yeah, so I mean, listen, I think the Prime Minister's office is still very much thinking about things like this in terms of who's watching it and who watches after the fact. But of course, we know that culture is rarely consumed by primary sources anymore. It's all secondary clips, memes, and reactions too. Yeah. I don't think we'll know what the real reaction is going to be to it for the next 24 to 48 hours. But I will be curious to see what gets clipped and what doesn't, because more people are going to watch the clips of it than the original interview itself. There's this point where, he's talking about leading and being Prime Minister and being a politician. And he sort of does this aside because, I've been doing this for a while now. And I like to think I'm pretty good at it.
Yeah.
And I guarantee you somebody is going to, Pierre Poilievre's team, the Conservatives, some right-wing meme account, it's going to pull that out, splice up a bunch of footage, talking about high inflation and food bank lines and how bad everything's going. And then it'll be the Prime Minister going, and I think I'm pretty good at it.
Sure.
So this sort of thing is just fodder for the secondary culture war meme knife fight that takes place after the fact.
I like that Justin Ling is designing memes on the fly. He's like,
I know.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was like, maybe they didn't think of that, but Justin's like, I've designed it for you. Please go and create it.
someone's like, okay, noted. I'm going to make that up right now.
I expect royalties.
Amil, I'm interested in the way that Trudeau uses pop culture specifically, because it used to be maybe a comfortable arena for him. He sort of used to be received with a bit of ease in that space. Watching that yesterday, was that ease there, do you think?
I mean, first of all, I didn't think it was as bad as Justin did.
Okay. All right.
I really didn't. I didn't think it was that cringy or that horrible. I thought as far as politician interviews on late night TV go, it was somewhere firmly in the middle. You know, he was kind of awkward, certainly with the, the off the cuff jokes and ribbing. He was a different version of him than we're probably used to, but I didn't think it was that bad. I feel that he probably did assume it would be received much more differently because he is so used to using pop culture and being sort of lauded in pop culture. Yeah. And that's his safe space. That's where he can go to sort of feel like maybe I'm getting booed at appearances, on the street, but when I'm on TV, that's kind of where I shine. And it seemed much more measured than past appearances that we've seen, for sure.
I just realized that the two of you, we used to work at Vice, which is, I didn't realize I had two former Vice people here.
Yes, comrades in arms.
I'm bringing this up because, Justin, a fun fact about you is that you produced the Prime Minister's interview with Shane Smith when you were at Vice. That was back in 2015. But this was when the Liberals were in third place, right? They went from third place to government. Fast forward to today, what is the strategy here? Like, who is Trudeau trying to speak to by choosing a place like Colbert?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a lot of kind of cynical media relations tactics that go into this, right? It's a simple fact that when you go get interviewed in the States, the interviewer is going to give you much more of a softball because they don't care about the policy nuances or the political realities that take place in this country. So by default, you're going to get easy questions. On top of that, they don't actually care about our politics, right? So they're actually more inclined to give personality, softball questions, things about, the back half of the interview is about Star Wars, right? And the Prime Minister watching an old clip of himself as a kid going to see the premiere of The Return of the Jedi, I think, or I'm not a Star Wars guy, I don't know. And then them debating about whether or not it's better than the Jedi
Empire
Fights
Strikes
Back. Thank you. Whatever. My God.
Actually, Justin, can I pause you there? And can I let's just hear the clip because I think people should hear that. Let's hear it.
It was better than The Empire Strikes Back in Star Wars. At least I think so.
Was it what you expected?
No, more. Much more.
Yeah. Does the review...
No, the review
40
doesn't
years
hold
later,
up.
the review does not hold up?
No. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, and now I am a man. Empire is the best Star Wars.
Empire Strikes Back. There you go. Well done.
Justin, that's probably like the most sort of personable moment from that interview, right?
Yeah, and you won't get that in a Canadian political interview because they're going to be more concerned about asking about other stuff. And by the way, the Prime Minister half remembering idioms is a thing we don't make fun of him for enough, but he did that to me when I was interviewing him the other month, and I find it fascinating. I want a supercut of all of his half-forgotten idioms. Yeah. But listen, he knows what he's getting from these American interviews. Yeah. It's easier. It's more eyeballs often. It's often more Canadian eyeballs. And it's a chance to kind of give him a bit of halo effect and to reach people who don't normally care.
Right. First of all, you keep designing memes on the show. The first one, and now you want this like supercut of the half-remembered idioms. Justin, you might be a meme machine. But second of all, I think like the thing that you're getting at is important. The thing that you're getting at, which is like using pop culture to telegraph something. Amil, that's generally what we do, right? Like, I don't know of anybody who walks into a party and goes like, hey, did you guys like see what the Bank of Canada did with the interest rates? That's not usually how you start these things. Okay, maybe
that's how you talk at a party, though.
That is how I talk at a party, but that's not how everybody talks at a party. But they do sort of use pop culture references. That's how we connect to one another. And there was a period of time, 9-10 years ago, when Justin Trudeau was a very effective sort of tool of pop culture. He could telegraph through pop culture means that you share values with him in a way. And then you get to this moment. In Justin Trudeau, and he's on Stephen Colbert, and he's trying to sort of do the same thing. He's trying to sort of telegraph that, like, I also connect with the same pop culture references that you connect with. Do you think that was successful in this interview?
Well, like Justin said, we're still a ways out from knowing what's connecting and what's not.
Yeah.
I do think as far as his demeanor last night, he seemed much more measured. We didn't get the crazy socks. We didn't have some of those like very recognizable sort of, shorthands that he usually pulls out on these appearances. Yeah. He seemed toned down. He seemed to sort of like have a message that he wanted to get across. And I feel that the appearance was really designed for that back half to sort of get to the part where we're talking about Canada's Trump, to get to the part where he can differentiate himself from who he sees as Canada's Trump, and just sort of focus on that messaging. Like, I am the different guy. I am the guy who thinks positively of Canada, who's optimistic, who's hopeful. Whereas I think previous pop culture appearances, previous appearances on late night shows were much more about him just sort of like being that charming, easygoing guy. He did not seem easygoing last night. He did not seem like the young Justin. But, we're in a very different moment politically. Culturally, there's a lot more vitriol and anger in our political conversations and in our culture conversations. So he just seemed like a product of the times that we're in, and those times are very different from 9 years ago.
Justin, that seemed to me to be a part of the strategy here. The idea that, like, if you go to an American audience, you're going to get an interviewer who says your opposition is kind of like Canada's Trump. That is not a phrase that you're really going to hear a lot here when speaking about the Conservative Party. But the idea that that's the reference point that someone like Stephen Colbert pulls out, it sort of plays a little bit to the story that Justin Trudeau is trying to talk about. So when we get to that latter half of the interview, the thing that Amil just mentioned, of actually talking about our politics, but to an American audience, how did that connect with you as you were sort of observing that?
Yeah, so I mean, it was clearly his best part of the interview. I mean, he got teed up so well by Colbert, this Canada's Trump thing, talking about the rise of the far right, the rise of xenophobia, which I think, whatever your feelings about Pierre Poilievre, and I have a lot of them certainly, don't think that's a fair characterization at all. It's the kind of characterization you'd only get from an American interviewer. And Trudeau very, very cleverly sort of sidesteps it and then goes into talking about dental care and pharmacare and, suggesting, my opponent doesn't even believe in the concept of dental care, which is just a phrase that like the average American is going to watch and hear and go like, what are you talking about? What do these words even mean in this context? But it was really interesting, though, because I actually don't know what the story of this interview was, right? Like when you go into something like this, you have a story you want to tell. And I have zero concept of what it was, right? Like at various points, he's talking about like our work in Haiti and Afghanistan. Like we're not really doing much work in Haiti and Afghanistan. Like at various points, he just looks like he's not really prepared for the questions. He doesn't really know what they're supposed to be talking about, which to my mind is the kind of big failure of this interview. This is an unbelievable vehicle. They had 3 segments.
20 minutes. They had 20 minutes on this. Yeah.
He could have put anything on the table. He could have used this as a horse, to ride in on and talk about and introduce ideas into the Canadian zeitgeist or into the international zeitgeist. He could have talked about Ukraine. He could have talked about a global corporate tax, which is something he kind of is working on. Like, he could have done a lot of different things here, and it just didn't feel like he had a reason to be there apart from like, oh, hey, I was in New York. I thought I'd pop by, which to my mind is kind of a failure of his overall ability to communicate. Like he doesn't know what the point of his being around is anymore. And I thought that like in a really meta sense, that's what this interview really was. It just looked like a lack of ambition.
What a place to land it. I think that is actually the perfect place to wrap up. So we're going to leave it there. Justin and Amil, I appreciate your time. I appreciate watching Colbert like at night, which is not a thing that I've done in a minute. And so I really appreciate it. Thank you again for coming on the show today.
Thanks.
Yeah, appreciate it. Talk to you soon. Justin Ling is a freelance reporter. Amil Niazi is a writer at The Cut and a regular right here on the show. They were speaking about Justin Trudeau's appearance last night on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. I'm Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. This is Commotion. Earlier this year, when the New York Times ranked the best books of the 21st century, Elena Ferrante's My Brilliant Friend was ranked number 1. Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan novels are basically as critically acclaimed as you could possibly get. Like, these books are so incredibly beloved. And when something is that successful, the question is, how do you even adapt a work that acclaimed? Like, should you even bother trying to do so? HBO decided to try, and My Brilliant Friend has earned rave reviews so far over 4 seasons. The show manages to do what the novel does so brilliantly, which is it treats the story of a friendship between 2 women as this really epic tale. You can hear it in the trailer even if you don't speak Italian. Listen to this.
In questa vita i buoni sentimenti sono fragili, le bugie sono meglio tranquillanti. Volere bene scorre insieme al volere male.
The friendship between Elena and Lila begins in girlhood in a poor Naples neighborhood in the 1950s, and then it goes from intimacy to rivalry. But their relationship kind of remains the most consistent relationship of their lives. Rafaela Bassili, he's here to talk about the show. Rafaela, welcome to the show.
Hello, thank you for having me.
My pleasure. Listen, what do you think it is that makes this TV adaptation so successful?
Right. I think you bring up a good point about, what is there even, how can you even add to this, to something that's already so complete? But I think there's a few things that bode well for this adaptation. I think it's perfect for television, actually. I think if were this adaptation to be done in a movie, it would be more a question of compressing the material rather than expanding it. So I think television is sort of a perfect medium, especially when television is now where a lot of, prestigious sort of mid-range dramas take place. And I think the show is doing a really good job being faithful to the material. I mean, especially in the voiceovers that are weaved through every episode in the show. It's kind of like a line by line,
reading,
situation. Even the dialogue sometimes is lifted straight from the books, but also it is doing its own thing in that it's very true to the visual medium. They're using a lot of sound. They're using some real news footage every now and again to kind of contextualize the period for viewers. The acting is very good and also very particular to the show. I feel like all the actors are working together really well. So I think that willingness to be, I don't think they're fooling themselves that they're making the show for anyone who is not already obsessed with the books, but to take the show and kind of expand it into its own thing. I think that's where they're finding a lot of success.
You used the word a minute ago, prestige, the idea that this is prestigious. It shares a lot of elements with soap opera, which is like not a term that we typically associate with prestige. How do you think the show manages to weave in the sort of soap opera elements of the story and still manage to sort of be a prestige show?
Well, I think these books are, and the story, and I think this is another element that the show has been really faithful to, they are extremely melodramatic. I mean, everything that happens is just like times 1,000. It's like, one little thing that your friend says to you, all of a sudden you're like questioning, like, what is it to be a woman? What is it to be a person? Like, what is it to be anything? So I think maybe that's a little bit where that soapy feel comes from, is this melodrama, this heightened emotional state. At every point, there's this kind of like sense of something's about to break, something really crazy is about to happen, even if what's being examined is just the relationship between, ostensibly ordinary people that are living their lives. So I think there's that. And then there's also the very elaborate and intricate world of the story. Like, there's the neighborhood, there's 1 million characters. It's a feature of the book that there's an index of characters in every subsequent novel that kind of gives you a little reminder of like, okay, this guy, was in a fight with that guy, and then they made up and then they fought again or whatever. So I think there's the sense that there's a lot happening all at once, so that in every episode you'll get a twist or a turn. I think that's what makes it feel kind of soapy, and I think that's what makes it feel pretty bingeable as well, that you'll want to keep, finding out what's going to happen.
But can I just say, this show does a lot of ambitious things that other shows would not try to do. We're into the 4th season now, which picks up right after where the 3rd season ends. Like, there's literally no time jump. Mm-hmm. But they've just recast a bunch of main characters, including Elena and Lila, with older actors. How do you pull off something that ambitious and that sort of unorthodox and still sort of keep your audience?
I know, it is pretty gutsy. I think that the audience had already been the first 2 actors that were playing Elena and Lila. They started when they were pretty young. They were on since the 1st season, but they are young. They're only 20, 21, I think. Mm-hmm. And they, at this point, season 4, these characters are supposed to be in their mid-30s. So there was already, an audience kind of being like, wait, I don't really buy that these girls are, 35 years old and have 2 kids. Like, that's a little bit of a stretch of the imagination. And then in the last season, they did something that I thought was pretty effective, where they had Elena, I think it's one of the last shots of the last season. She looks into a mirror, and when she sees her reflection, it's Alba Raw-Walker, who's the woman who's playing her as an older, in this latest season. Yeah. And she has been the voiceover. She's been Lenu this whole time through the voiceover. So I think it's kind of a natural transition. Right. And I don't know where or how they found this woman to play Lila that looks just like a grown-up version of the actor. I mean, it's uncanny. So I feel like in that, it's already kind of like, you're like, okay, I'm with this. Like, this is fine. Like, I buy this now.
We're talking about a show that subverts the usual storytelling of friendships between women and does so very successfully. We're talking about a show that, it's one thing for the show not to find its audience, but there aren't a lot of critics writing about it this season either. Why do you think the show is being overlooked for trying something that so few shows actually try to do?
I know, it's sort of frustrating because I think there is so much to plumb out of it. I wonder if critics are kind of feel like they have exhausted the topic on Ferrante. I mean, these books have been endlessly discussed since they came out more than 10 years ago. And sometimes I wonder if it's because people think that moment of like female friendship stories, female centric stories, maybe people feel like that moment has kind of passed, or there's been everything that's, that you can say on this topic has already been said. But I do think it is doing interesting things. And for an international production also that has found such an audience in the States and beyond, I think we should be talking more about it. I think there's a lot to say about it. But I do wonder if it's a little bit of Ferrante fatigue at this point, which I will never ever have.
Yeah, I think like that's the division, right? It's like between people who are like, listen, I can't keep hearing about Ferrante because just let us know who you are or don't, And then there are people who are like, actually, we can never stop talking about Elena Ferrante. And I understand both sort of schools of thought. Rafaela, I know that there's not a lot of critics writing about this, but I appreciate that you are. So thank you so much for coming on the show to talk about My Brilliant Friend. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Of course, anytime. Rafaela Bassili is a TV critic at Vulture. My Brilliant Friend is in its 4th and final season. It's on Crave right now. And listen, before I let you go, I just wanted to play you a bit of this.
Welcome the spring, the summer rain, softly turn to sing again. Welcome the bud, the summer blooming flower.
That beautiful song right there is a little bit of Ever New by Beverly Glenn Copeland. We wanted to go out on this song today because Beverly Glenn Copeland just announced his final Canadian show will be in Montreal this week. Beverly is one of our great singers and composers, and he's announced he's been diagnosed with dementia. He made that announcement on Instagram yesterday in a video alongside his wife, Elizabeth. In the post, he said, in part, quote, "We want to challenge the mainstream image of illness, which focuses on loss. We are actively asking the universe to show us where is the life here. We wish Beverly and his wife, Elizabeth, all the best." Beverly Glenn Copeland plays a show in Montreal on Thursday, and then he's going to be in Brooklyn on September 30th and Saugerties, New York on October 5th. That's it for the show today. My name is Elamin Abdul-Mahmoud. Have a good day.
Welcome the child whose hand